everybody. So we're going to have a great conversation around endpoint security. We have three very interesting panelists. So when we were thinking about, who do we get on a panel to talk about endpoint security, which is really it's a 20-year-old problem, right? Right. So we kind of thought, hey, why don't we get a very established company. They've been doing this for a long time. So we have somebody from Symantec, and I'll have them introduce themselves. Is that better? I'll have them introduce themselves when they come on the stage, but we have somebody from Symantec. Ashok, why don't you come on the stage? We have somebody from Palo Networks, obviously a very established security company who's also now in the endpoint security space. So Gemmell is with Palo Alto, and then a startup, right? We got to have a startup. This is Ty. So Vova, who is with Cyberhaven, and he's going to introduce himself as well in a minute.
Hi, Ashok Banerjee. I'm the CTO for enterprise security products at Symantec. It's about 12 different products, quite a bit of endpoint security. So look forward to the panel.
Dal?
Hey everyone, thanks for participating and joining. My name is Gemmell, and I'm head of endpoint marketing at Palo Alto Networks. Prior to Palo Alto, I was at a startup for a couple of years. Before that, I was actually at Symantec for 3, and then Trend Micro for almost 10.
Vova?
Hi, I'm Volodymyr Kuznetsov, Vova for short. I'm the CEO of Cyberhaven, which is a stealth mode startup where we are rethinking the way the enterprises are protecting their data on the endpoints and making the data immune to attacks even when endpoints are already compromised.
Great, thank you guys. So I'll ask them a bunch of questions, and if there's anything you guys want to kind of talk about, if there's any questions you have, if you want, you can kind of jump in at the middle, just raise your hand. I can ask you, or we can do this at the end of the session as well. So, hey, Ashok, let me start with you, and let me ask you a question you may not like. So 5 years ago, right, you talk to any enterprise, they would focus on, hey, I'm going to pick between Symantec and McAfee. That's my endpoint security. Now there's like 30 guys doing this, right? There's 30 plus companies, and they're all encroaching in this space. What changed? Why do so many startups and so many big companies exist now?
Excellent question. I actually asked Haseeb not to ask trick questions. That is a trick question, but good. Every startup which started up definitely found at some point some gap in the protections of Symantec. Otherwise, they wouldn't be funded, they wouldn't be raised, etc. Over time, the question becomes, does Symantec seal up those gaps? Or does the gap remain? Or is it an adjacent layer? Not all items in cybersecurity are the same. There is detection, protection, remediation, all kinds of things. There is a collapse of the worlds. And I believe with SEP 14, Symantec is has sealed up already a lot of that space. And we'll go more into things.
Thanks. Dal, let me ask you a similar question. So Palo Alto is a firewall company. Why did you guys decide to enter the endpoint security space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Palo Alto Networks has really built its name on network security and building next-gen firewalls. Many years back, they said, look, we really want to elevate where we are. So today we're focused on network security, but we want to solve a broader enterprise security problem. And in order to do that, we can't just do it from the network. We can't do it as a next-gen firewall company. If we really want to solve these hard enterprise security problems, we need to build a platform. And part of that platform includes core components like advanced endpoint protection.
Excellent. So you guys haven't used the magic phrase machine learning yet, but let me bring it up. So there have been panels already talking about machine learning, but one of the things that I see in the marketing literature, so the silence guy was here earlier. Let me just pick on that. What does that mean? What is it, and why does it matter? I mean, is it the new thing? Did it exist 10 years ago for Symantec and others? I mean, Ashok, you want to start, and Bo, if you can talk about that as well.
So within Symantec, there was machine learning even 10 years ago. What was there and not there, let's be very clear. If you look at the patent and literature, it's openly verifiable, and you wouldn't scale up to those volumes without some machine learning. So that's the first part. What was not there was ability to push down decision trees to the endpoints. You were able to do machine learning in the cloud and push down more simplistic things. With SEP 14, yes, that's why many of the tests some of the vendors were doing turned off cloud protection for Symantec, because cloud protection had the machine learning. So machine learning has been there. Now it's much more there on the endpoint. One other piece to note, strictly speaking, this is not just a machine learning game. This is machine learning with game theory. Why? For Netflix or Amazon, no one tries to fool Netflix into believing you love movies you don't like. No one tries to fool Amazon into believing you want products which you don't. Here there's an active adversary. Mathematically, these are different. Mathematically, time series, machine learning, you asymptote to the truth. Game theory, you hit a Nash equilibrium. It's different. And it's a blend of those two that we focus on.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on this last aspect. Actually, machine learning is indeed not new, but very actively evolving. And in particular, adversarial machine learning is quite widely discussed topic in the machine learning communities these days. And indeed, if your adversary is actively trying to fool machine learning, there are pretty easy ways to do that. It's not foolproof. So machine learning, as is, may not be, it's certainly a part of the solution, it may not be the solution on its own. Also, well, machine learning is a tool, it's a very powerful tool. As any powerful tool, it can be used for good and for bad. And in particular, attackers, the bad guys, could also take advantage of it. For instance, as an example of that, DARPA, the agency that, is widely known. They organized one of the grand challenges that they like to do last year about building machine learning based systems that can automatically, without any human involvement, defend machines, defend systems, but also attack systems. And during the competition, teams built these automated systems that were able to design attacks against real programs that even the designers of the challenge didn't envision before the challenge. So
great.
This is a tool that can be used both ways.
Yeah, Dal, you had a comment on that as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what my fellow panelists were saying. You know, machine learning, it's a buzzword that has really caught on in the endpoint security space. But it's one tool in the toolbox, right? In order to really look at this from a holistic perspective, I mean, the endpoint security problem is a tough problem. Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro, these guys have been going after it for 30 years, right? Now, machine learning, one of the core components is having a big enough training set or the data in order to train the algorithm so that you can be accurate. When you look at a lot of young vendors who are trying to do this, they don't have that training set. And so what you see potentially is a lot of false positives. But the point is, machine learning is just one tool. You need to really have a more holistic approach if you want to try and solve this endpoint security problem.
Can I go one more?
Please.
Excellent point, Dal. So in machine learning, we are oftentimes not inventing completely new learning algorithms and techniques. We're applying them to cybersecurity. If you look at the literature, they're great patterns, but they're applications of a lot of paper, research, etc. When you're applying, you're looking at who wins, how much data you have, how many rows, how many columns. That's what you learn on. After that, you will reach some point. So the number of rows is how many endpoints you have, how much data you collect. How many columns is often, are you collecting static attributes only? Are you collecting behavioral? Are you collecting emulation attributes? What other attributes are you collecting? Anything stochastic? Some items will behave one way once in every 10 runs, it will show its hand. All of that comes into play. So,
thanks. So, we talked about machine learning. I had to get that out of the way. Okay. Do you want to hold on to a few questions? Thank you. So let me ask you one thing. So there are companies out there who talk about this notion of prevention, that we're going to make sure that your device never gets infected, whatever that means. And then there's a set of companies who say, well, that is crazy. That's never going to happen. You should focus on detection and response. So assume you're breached and now focus on detection and response. What, as an enterprise who's looking at solutions, what should people do? I mean, and actually, if you don't mind, Boba, would you mind starting there? Because you're on the EDR side, I would say. Why do you think prevention is not the right thing to do?
Well, first of all, I think that's not new. So prevention was never perfect. Companies were never saved by just running an antivirus. And I think that according to various reports you can read, for instance, recent PwC report says that 90% of large organizations were breached last year, which is an astonishing number. Even if you don't believe it and say it's 10%, it's still huge. So not having a strategy on what to do when you're breached is crazy. You have to have that strategy, and that strategy is today often an enterprise detection and response tool like Carbon Black or SentinelOne or any of these companies. The problem with these tools, though, is that they often can only help you after the breach is detected, and that's often too late. Well, Yahoo, for instance, took 2 years to know they were breached, and on average, according to PwC report, it's about 5 months before the breach happens, before it gets detected by a company. So today we have these two groups of tools, the prevention tools that aim to keep malware out of your endpoints. They not always work, that's why you have detection and response tools. They exist only because prevention tools don't work, but they help you after the breach is detected. The question is what happens in between, and this is what our company Cyberhaven is about.
So to be clear, you're saying between a breach and detection, the average time frame is 5 months. So is that what I heard?
Yes, that is what I'm saying according to reports, to industry reports. And this is because prevention and detection both are fundamentally, well, it's a cat and mouse game. It's a game between companies trying to get better at detection and attackers trying to get better at hiding.
So I know Ashok has an opinion on this. What do you think before we go to Ashok?
Yeah, so I don't think anybody believes that prevention will ever be 100%, right? If somebody has enough resources, enough time, takes enough effort, they're going to breach an endpoint. And that's just the way it is. That's the reality. Now, we feel that even though no one can claim prevention is 100%, there is still very much a place in prevention. And for us, we feel you need to focus on prevention because that's where you're adding the most value to customers. If I can prevent 99% or even more, and yes, I'm missing point-something %, fine, then maybe you have other tools, maybe EDR tools, to now deal with that. And you're not overcome with this massive amount of data or alerts to sift through. It's very small, very actionable, and you can prioritize. The problem with EDR is there's the promise and the reality. The promise is not everything can prevent 100%, therefore you should get EDR, and EDR, guess what, will detect the rest, and then you can remediate it. The reality is unless you have the capability in-house, unless you have the capacity to be able to deal with all that information, you're going to get overwhelmed and that tool's not going to be used. And actually you have a bigger problem now because technically you know about this issue and you didn't act on it. So I think it's, when you're looking at endpoint security holistically, prevention absolutely has a place. EDR has a place, and there's other methods also that have their place. So definitely should not give up on prevention, though.
And to be clear, when you say EDR, you mean endpoint detection and response. Is that right? Okay,
correct.
Thank you. Ashok.
I think I agree. I would put an analogy. Do you need vitamins or painkillers or hospice care or post-mortem? Probably at different stages, all of these come into play.
I don't want post-mortem.
I don't want the post-mortem either. So you still need EDR, because if we start doing, if we harden an endpoint, it's very hard to breach it. Very, very hard. But it becomes very difficult to get exactly the right minimal footprint of policies. So it's a trade-off between convenience and security, and the right trade-off includes all of these. So you do want even before that, prevention. You should run your scans and everything, compliance. You should do prevention, protection with Symantec and other products. You should think about containment, information protection. You should think about EDR. Right now, the problem is you can take 5 vitamins, 5 pills. You can't run 5, 6 products on an endpoint. So there is a collapse of the worlds. But you do need all of that. I think we'll see consolidation here.
So you said something, a number of products, you talked about 5, 6 different vitamins. So as a buyer at an enterprise, right, I mean, what is your collective recommendation? I mean, how many solutions do I actually need? Do I need to go to 3 different vendors? Or actually, let me ask you a different question. Do I need 3 different kinds of, or 4 different kinds of products? They could come from the same vendor, possibly, right? But they could come from best of breed. How should I, as let's say, a guy in a security team in enterprise, how should I even think about this?
Excellent question. So I think it's better together, and here's why. If you have 4 products and one, hypothetically say, looks for people wearing caps covering half the face, shoot that person. Sure, it looks suspicious. People with weapons, shoot that person. High rate of false positives. The ability to look at multiple blades and conditionally pass on, this looks suspicious, please be a bit more alert, to the next level and the next level, allows you to be more precise as you go further down the chain. And with SEP 14, we actually have EDR. We have some of these baked in, and that's what we are doing. So
to be clear, you're saying you work for Symantec, and you're saying we should buy only Symantec products. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Where we have managed to consolidate that.
Dal, what do you think?
Well, I mean, look, it really depends on the enterprise. It depends on the capabilities. I mean, if you EDR, the promise sounds good, but if you don't have the staff, or you don't have the people or the expertise to take that information and make it actionable, then it's not helping you. So I do believe that you really need to take a pragmatic approach based on what your needs and the type of enterprise and the maturity of your team. EDR, that technology is great if you have a dedicated SOC and you have people that are monitoring those alerts. If you don't have it, not sure if it's worth the expense. I do believe with Ashok that if there is a company, for example, Palo Alto Networks, that can provide multiple pieces of this puzzle, then it makes sense if they're natively integrated rather than going with best-of-breed products, trying to stitch them all together, trying to make them talk, going to multiple consoles. You're just adding this administrative overhead and creating new problems. So I do agree with Ashok on the better together if you can find it in a vendor. Not sure if I agree about the Symantec part, though.
So, you don't have a choice. You're a small company. You don't have all of these things. I'm assuming your opinion is people should buy your solution and others. But how do you kind of answer that question when customers say to you, well, I'm looking at Symantec and I feel like they already have everything I need?
Well, I think that...
Or Palo Alto. Sorry, Dal.
To answer that question, I think the biggest question you as a buyer should ask is what value I'm getting per solution. If I buy yet another antivirus, when I add it to my system to the security infrastructure I already have, how much value I'm getting out of this new product. And the truth is that when you get the product that's similar to what you already have, you get defense in depth, you get, it might detect like people who are with guns or wear something on their faces, but at some point you get diminishing returns of products that do essentially the same thing. So the value per product would be much higher if you get a portfolio of products that look at the problem from different sides, from the different perspectives. If your resources are limited, which is almost always the case, I think it's also very important to think what is it we are trying to protect. Are we really trying to protect our endpoints? Endpoints, well, you can replay them, you can re-image them. That's not the end of the world if endpoints are breached. The end of the world is when the data leaves the endpoint and is stolen or compromised. So our approach at our company, at Cyberhaven, is focusing just on that, on protecting what really matters to most organizations, rather than trying to protect everything.
So that was an interesting point. So the point you made was we protect endpoints because end of the day there's data on the endpoints, right? That's really end of the day. That's the point you made. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, well, there may be many things going bad if your endpoints are infected. For instance, say your endpoints, bad guys might use them to mine bitcoins or to send spam, right? And this is bad, but this is not nearly as bad as losing your data. You would probably pay substantial amount of money to make sure your data is not lost. You will not pay the same amount of money to prevent hackers from sending spam from your endpoints.
So that brings up an interesting question. So there's a report by Verizon that says that 90% of attacks start at the endpoint. Why is that? I mean, endpoint security has existed forever, right? So arguably, bad guys should have kind of said, wow, this is like foolproof, all this stuff I cannot get into endpoints, I got to go somewhere else. But still, 90% of attacks are happening on endpoints. Why?
Excellent question. So attackers move as protection moves, and there are hype cycles and some product seals up one area, the attackers are moving as well. The attack surface on the endpoint is any email you click on, any browser, any JavaScript, any PowerShell, and the number of languages. It's not just assembly you don't receive in one shot. You're receiving Java, PowerShell, WMI, WScript, JavaScript, whole lot of little things which do, and in the end, it's very hard to say with low false positives what is intended deletion and what was malware deletion. It's fun. Both are deleting a file. Which one was which is non-trivial. So we always have a recall precision curve, and we operate somewhere, and a more seasoned hacker tries to go more closer and closer to good files, good behavior, and think of it as a walk down the decision tree. Say we go 3 levels, to make it convenient, let's see if we can go 5 levels or 7 levels. And that's why we try with many different techniques and hopefully make it much harder. So every layer does something. And today, a lot of the attacks are on the endpoint because they need code execution. On the network, you're just playing with 4 commands. Can I sequence these 4 with some parameters to cause some behavior? And endpoint, I get much more free reign, more execution.
Dal, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so 90% on endpoints, stupid users. No, but kidding aside.
Are you calling me stupid? So.
Kidding aside, as I think as Ashok said, it's very complex. It's a complex environment. In addition to what was mentioned, the number of vulnerabilities that can be detected and leveraged, both in the operating system and also applications that are core applications, so you can't whitelist them, that are running on the operating system as well. And the security landscape or the threat landscape is a very dynamic one, right? We are living in this world where innovation and the speed of innovation has never been quicker, both on the security side and also on the attacker side. And the way that we think about it is really the cost of attacks and the frequency of successful attacks. So if the cost of attacks is very small, the likelihood or the frequency of successful attacks is really going to increase. Now, Palo Alto Networks, our approach is, yes, prevention will never be 100%, but let's increase the cost of those attacks so much so that we can drive down the economics and minimize the chance of successful attacks. So that's really our approach, but as we said, it's a zoo on the endpoint. Nothing's really consistent, a lot of vulnerabilities. People are running apps that they shouldn't be running, and education, obviously, as we said. And I think all those factors play a role into why it's such a sought-after target.
So, Vova, let me change the question a little bit before you answer. So, you talked about this changing basically increasing the cost of the attack, right? So, why don't all enterprises go VDI, right? Why not just deploy I don't know, just dump terminals everywhere and run everything. So no endpoints, right? No endpoint, no worries, right? Why don't people do that?
So I think that's actually an excellent question, and it also comes down to this question of why endpoints are under attack. And so what Ashok and Dal suggested is it comes down to that it's an easy target. It's the easiest target at the moment. It might change. In the future, maybe endpoints would be more secure, like iPhone is more secure and then desktop. So maybe attackers would move to the servers. But actually, there is one other reason that's more fundamental, and that comes down to the incentive. So on the servers, you can use encryption to protect your data. You can use encryption to protect your data at rest and in transit. Even if attackers break into the server, they might not be able to get anything valuable to them. For the endpoint, that's fundamentally not true. And it doesn't matter whether your endpoint is a real physical device or a VDI, or maybe it's running somewhere on the server side, as long as the user can access the data, can log into the system, decrypt the data, view it, and edit it. The malware that controls the endpoint can do the same. So the incentive of breaking into endpoints is much higher, because by doing so, you automatically get the same level of access as the user who owns that endpoint. So if you break into the CEO endpoint, you get access to pretty much everything in the company. And that's something that's not gonna change. I think for that reason, the endpoints will remain the target for the time being.
So let me ask one more question before we go to the audience. So you brought up mobile phones, right? How should one think about with endpoints could be desktops, right? Windows and whatever issues Windows or Mac or Windows OS or Mac OS brings to the table, or it could be a relatively locked down OS like iOS, which is a pretty locked down environment. How should an enterprise think about protecting mobile versus kind of plain old desktops? Ashok, what do you think?
Sure. We actually have mobile solutions as well. In the mobile world...
Oh, really? Is that right? Wow.
In the mobile world, we are much more, the apps are much more sandbox. The variance is much less. What is approved and what is not approved can be pushed by MDM. You won't allow that today on the endpoint. Whether it's endpoint or VDI, even if it's VDI, it's not here, it's there, it's still the same thing, it's got the data, there's a high variability of the activity. On a server, there's actually quite low variability. I'm going to run these 3 jobs. No other process should run. These 3 jobs touch these 7 files, and that's it, day in and day out. Once you've locked it down with those, on a server, it's actually much harder. The variance is very high on an endpoint. And the frequency of updates changes very high. Makes it a lot harder. So,
Del, do you have any thoughts on that? Mobile versus regular desktop?
Well, I mean, look, from so Palo Networks actually has a Android client as well. It's in beta, so go sign up. Thanks. But kidding aside, look, the threat landscape and where the high-value targets are still at the desktop workstations, right? They're not there at mobile. Now you do see some attacks. More nuisances than anything, but the thinking is as phones become more and more ubiquitous and the amount of processing and work that actually gets done on tablets or these type of devices increases, then the attackers will shift their sights. So not there yet, but definitely is something to look for on the horizon.
Thank you. Well, any thoughts on that?
Yes, actually, I have a slightly different perspective on that. I think that there is one big difference between mobile and desktops. Desktops were designed before security became an issue. Like all major operating systems on desktops they have roots in 90s. Mobiles were designed when security was already an issue and a point of concern for many. So from ground up, the systems were built in a better way from the security point of view. As Ashok mentioned, there is a lot more of sandboxing, a lot more of controls through MDM, a lot more ways to lock down the mobile. So a lot of hype around mobile is more of a fear of an unknown rather than than them being less secure at the moment. Going forward, yes, I think as mobile takes over and traditional desktops go into the past, I think attackers will shift focus on mobile, and it might be more of an issue. But I don't think it's the biggest security vector today.
So I would surmise that as follows: endpoints, such classic desktops are, well, they're the low-hanging fruit. So the attackers haven't moved on to mobile as much as perhaps the market believes, because so they may be more secure, but it's just so easy to attack the classic endpoint. So people still focus on that, and once that's kind of taken care of, then they will shift focus to mobile at some point in the near future. Is that a fair assessment?
I would disagree a little. Okay. If you're a hacker, think economics. You want to develop this code and you want to attack a lot of things for a while. Mobile is a walled garden. Android catches you, kicks you out. iOS catches you, kicks you out. Your horizon for getting the attacks done is much less, versus your horizon on a desktop is significant. So the walled garden matters. The sandboxing matters, and one positive thing for all the endpoint stuff, in addition to all the good stuff we talked about, actually if you look at hack kits, they are increasing in price, because you need to do far more to break out of the protections we are putting in, the layers of protection. It's not enough, but it is rising in price, and everything depends on economics.
Right. That's the right way to think about it, right? I mean, attacks are a function of how much money they make and how much money they have to spend to carry out the attack, right? So both have to be taken into account. Let me turn over to the audience. The gentleman here had a question from 20 minutes ago. I apologize for taking a while.
Thank you. The 20 minutes ago question was, how do you define endpoint? What is endpoint? Is it the computers? Is it these guys? So this is Varun. I run marketing for an enterprise mobile security company, SkyCure. Some of the things, SkyCure. Some of the things you said make sense. Palo Alto said that hackers will change focus later. I think they're already doing it. For 10 consecutive quarters, the PC sales have come down. There are more than 2 billion of these devices. All of us have it in our pocket right now. How many computers are on right now? We talked about vulnerabilities. We talked about apps. What about networks? What if people are connecting to malicious Wi-Fi networks? If the user can see it, the hacker can see it. So why is it that enterprises are still focusing on traditional endpoints and not focusing on where the hackers are focusing on?
I think there are attacks on mobile. And there are attacks right from Wi-Fi hotspots, when you go to the hotel, attacks trying to become the MDM, a whole lot of attacks on mobile. But if you still look at the thrust of the attacks, yes, the mobile side is increasing rapidly. If you look at the thrust of the hacking community, it's still not that much in the mobile, despite the uptick. The uptick will continue, I believe. As the endpoint becomes more and more secured and the price point rises beyond a point, yes, this will happen as well. At this moment, as far as I know, Metasploit is not doing that much with the mobile. And a lot of these first-level hackers find the exploits. Someone builds a tool, someone builds a UI, and then the fourth-level guy gets arrested for doing the criminal activity. So the first-level guys are finding things. We don't have the UIs so built out yet, is my impression. But it's a great domain.
You have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think it also comes down to the cost. So I would like to second Ashok's argument about the cost of the hacking tools. Actually, the cost of like the bug bounties are a good approximation of that. So I think iOS latest bug bounty was $500,000. It's way more than bug bounties you're getting for desktops, even though the desktop exploit, you could probably hack a lot of companies once you have it. The iOS exploit, once you use it once it becomes public, it will be fixed very quickly. So just the economics, even though mobile is taking over and you have more data on mobile, it's still very expensive. It's more expensive to hack, to break into than desktop.
Excellent.
Time for one last question.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Abhijit Fanse from United Layer. We're a private and multi-cloud company, so that's where I'm coming from. I'd appreciate your perspective on the business model of the hacker.
what is the effort? How much money do they actually spend? What is the potential gain?
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The question was business model of the hacker?
Of the hacker, yes.
Yeah. Well, how much money are they making to doing this? I guess that's one way to think about it, right?
Well,
Should I be a hacker?
no, I mean, so...
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think there's a stat out there saying that the underground economy is generating more money than the security industry, right? So it's definitely a growing market. I mean, they're not only being innovative in the attacks, but also their business models. So you will have sites that are up, and you can download attacks, you can test them, you can pay with Bitcoin to see if, make sure that the attack worked based on the engine that you're testing against. You have things like ransomware as a service. So all these business models that exist in other software companies, they're adopting them and applying them to the attacking situations as well.
Let me take, I'll go.
Yeah, I wanted to add that actually I think that's one of the biggest changes that we have. I think that the entire hacking community, the bad guys community, went from being a hobby like 10 years ago into being a very strong economy with innovative business models. If you think of ransomware, it's actually quite, it's a good business model. It's a solid one. Like, it really generates revenue very well, and they are improving. There is now blackmailware and other varieties of that. So I think by this move from being a hobby into being an underground economy is what actually what's one of the key reasons we see so many attacks these days. And the next maybe warfare. That's maybe the next step after economy.
Let me try to...
The last comment, go ahead.
So in the underground community, it's very regional communities. If you look, there are specific Russian communities, Romanian communities, Argentinian communities. Most of these countries, you never want to hack in the country of whose jurisdiction you belong. So if you are if you're here, don't hack anything American. You go to jail. You don't want to hack an ally of the country. You'll get extradited. It's very economically sensible decisions. You are typically finding people buying exploits, buying landing pages, services, which will detect what kind of browser, what kind of attack kit to deploy to you. Some reverse shell. What is the reverse shell? The whole chain you purchase, and it's like Lego building blocks. And there's an ecosystem in the underground economy. So interestingly, your credit cards sell for $1 because you'll cancel your credit card. Your health records sell for $65. I think mobile, the bigger concern is not the data. You're trapped inside a garden. You get killed very quickly. The bigger concern is, can I get your location, your Bluetooth? If I do an union and intersection, walk around the room, I will find out whose Bluetooth is which, and can I stalk this person? And IoT and some of these will become other parts of the ecosystem.
Perfect. Thank you, Haseeb and the panelists.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.